and this is Norwich Confidential.
And we're here tonight.
I'm glad you're feeling well enough to come in. I know you're still not feeling well.
For those of you, who may not know it yet, but there is an epidemic of flu going on right now, and so everyone is probably getting symptoms of fatigue, muscle aches, chills,
temperatures,
fever, and the whole thing.
Right.
So just be careful, wash your hands, and that will tell you that those who don't wash their hands are the ones who will get the flu.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily. Nobody washes their hands as often as our daughter.
Well,
and she just called to let us know that she also now is sick. So.
And she lives in New Jersey, of course.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen her for some time, so we didn't give it to her.
We didn't give it to her, right.
It's talking about the flu, so the question is, well, what do you normally take when you have the flu? Well, a lot of people will give you the newer medications, supposedly to prevent the flu. But what we're going to talk about tonight is the average price
of drugs
and medications. And because, as you probably may have known, if you go to the emergency room and then you get a prescription, you go to the pharmacist, and the first thing that you will see when the pharmacist brings you the medication is maybe a little bit of a sticker shock. And then you say, well, I have my insurance. I thought my insurance paid for this. And then the pharmacist will tell you, no, that's your copay.
That's the copay, yeah. That's the sticker shock, is the amount of copay you now have to pay for them.
Well, there are still cheaper medications, of course, and so we want you to know what the alternatives are. But
what about Tamiflu for this? What's happening now?
That's also expensive. So, anyways, what I want to go over is that medications are rising rapidly and faster than the rate of inflation. And there was a news item that for an average medication, the cost will go up by approximately 10% every year. And so just like you're compounding your mortgage, how many years does it take to double your money? And well, that would be about 7 years. So basically what they're saying is that 7 years ago, cost of medication is half as much as it is costing you now. And that is probably true. Now, that is not to say, what about the new drugs? Because obviously you must have heard that there are certain drugs that cost $1,000 a pill or $1,500 a pill. Well, they are around, and they are all over the place. And they're not just that one single pill, but there are several other pills that are costing you that much. So those are a different category, and we call them the medicals, and those are specially made medications supposedly to target a certain type of diseases. But let's go to the average cost of medications, and we're talking about things like ordinary antibiotics, ordinary penicillin, ordinary pain medication, and this kind of thing.
Normal hypertensive medications?
Well, especially hypertension medication.
Cholesterol medications?
Cholesterol medications, as well as diabetes medicines and so on. Well, those are the kind of medications that a lot of people take, not just the elderly, but a lot of people take because those medications are widely prescribed for very common illnesses that we now have. And so 7 years ago, it would have cost you half of what it would cost you now. So now the question really is, well, why are these medications rising faster than the average income from a fixed income person, the retired?
Do you have the answer?
Well, the answer basically is kind of conjectural. There's no reason why this medication should go up in price this fast and this high, but obviously we always end up blaming the pharmaceutical companies.
Well, I have some answers.
Well, what are your answers?
Well, the first answer is greed, because of all the billions of dollars these pharmaceutical companies do make, and they make billions, only 8% is ever designated for research and development. But the amazing thing is that that 8% research and development that they have tagged in that goes to doctors so that they can do their drug trials.
Well, that's part of the marketing that they said,
Right.
and that, of course, almost all doctors in the United States become part of that so-called research project.
Not all of them, sweetheart.
Well, so when these new medications are being marketed, the first place that pharmaceutical companies would go to would be the doctors in your community all over, and they can be given money to, one, use the medication, prescribing it, or two, go out on a lecture and lecture other doctors
as a consultant,
and they get paid. They get paid quite a bit. As a matter of fact, if you go into the list, there's a list that you can get, and you can actually put the name of your doctors and the zip code, and it will tell you how much that doctor received this past year and from what company and what company, and it can be substantial. But in any case, that is part of the so-called marketing. And of course, they also have televisions, and they also have a drug representative that comes to doctor's office and buy them lunch and buy them whatever it is.
But a lot of the marketing is much more than 8%. That 8% is what they're saying is included for their research and development. But when you look in that, there is a lot of the marketing that is being used out of that 8% on top of the 20% that they're using for marketing.
So basically, the cost of medication, you'll have to consider the fact that when they do the research on such medication, it takes an average of about 10 years to develop a medication from research lab all the way to the finished product.
But how often does the research lab, for example, the majority of drugs today are actually researched out of universities first, with monies that come from our tax dollars from the National Health Institute of Health. So those researched new drugs that are coming out of universities find their way to either new pharmacies that are all of a sudden developed because of that particular drug, or they work their way into Merck or Pfizer's or one of the other drug companies. How does that happen?
Well, it happens because the doctors or the researchers who did the research can work, say, in National Health Institute and do some research, and that's what they're doing. And when they get out of finish their fellowship, they bring with them that intellectual property, which, interestingly enough, should have been a property of the institution, but it has become a property of the person who did the research. And so what they did is, what they usually do is they will make their own small laboratory and put out a product like this, and then lo and behold, they get bought by big companies like Pfizer. And that goes on and on and on. The same thing that happens with, well, a very good example would be that medication Lipitor, because that was basically done research by a small drug company. And then Pfizer came over and bought that brand. And so now Pfizer had that, at least the patent for that product for several years. And they made such a huge sum of money from that.
Well, why isn't the money ever repaid back to, like, the National Institute of Health?
Because the National Institute of Health is not there for profit. They're not there to market the product.
They're also not there. They shouldn't be there for the benefit of these large pharmaceutical companies either, Ben.
But that was not the original intention of this whole thing. And it is the same thing as other researchers, like companies like Amgen. There's a couple of Harvard researchers who at that time were doing basically recombinant DNA, and one of the things that came out of their research was the human insulin that they cultured from bacteria. And I think those doctors came out of that, then built their own company, Amgen, and they were the first to market this insulin that is human insulin, of course. And so now it's a huge company. So the question is, well, why didn't the Harvard get the profit from all of this? Well, because Harvard did not go into research trying to make money. They basically went into research because they're trying to make a research. And whoever the doctors are doing the research decided to take advantage of their fruit of the research and build their own company.
Right, but they did not pay for the lab. They did not pay for the equipment. They did not pay for all the materials that were used in that lab.
It was paid by grants coming from different sources, National Institute of Health and so
right.
on.
But that's also, again, it's the tax dollars that pay for it.
Well, that is a research, and that is what research is for. And so there are people who wants to profit from the research, and there are people who did not or who do not want to profit from the research, just like the polio vaccine.
Right. I mean, he wouldn't even patent it. It was a free vaccine because
that is true. And the human genome is the same thing. People were able to do a genetic mapping, and nobody is profiting that. It's in the internet. You can do your research. And these are basic science research that were done in universities and so on, facilities, and they decided that they will publish their findings in the internet and that they do not want to get any
So what makes the difference between the doctor that develops the vaccine for polio and the doctor that has, again, all the support? I don't know how much support Salt got with the vaccine, but with the polio vaccine. But we do know now how much support these researchers are getting to come up with things like the human insulin.
Well, it again depends on...
And that's that could be life-saving.
It boils down to really what really is the intention of the doctors who made those research. If their intention is to make money, then they could probably do research to treat ingrown toenail and make millions of dollars of that. And whereas there are some doctors who, just for the sake of research, will probably discover a cure for a certain cancer and probably will not even think of charging somebody for that medication or something that they discovered. And there's a lot of that in medicine. And what we are seeing basically are the greed that surface up to the top. And it is just, the example would be that a certain person who bought that patent for Daraprim, which is an anti-parasite medication, and from what I understand, this would have cost something like $13 a tablet, and he decided to sell it for $750 a pill. And there was actually some email that was leaked out that when he presented this idea to his investors, he actually was able to show that for your investment with this particular medicine, that within 1 year your investment will turn into something like $3 million.
Right, but the fact is he was not a researcher.
No.
He wasn't even a physician.
No, he was a businessman.
Just a specific businessman. And the fact that is an old medication.
It is an old medication.
So how corrupt can our patent system be, where somebody can buy an old patent? I mean, this patent expired. Patents are only supposed to be valid for like 7 years.
Because there is a gentleman's agreement among pharmaceutical companies that says that you do your thing and we will not compete against you. And so there are a lot of medications out there that are old, that no longer are being used, or at least may be used exclusively for a certain disease. Now, when one company take that and develop that so-called old medication, the other companies will not touch them. So they have this kind of gentleman's agreement.
But there's something wrong with the patent system itself.
And that is why the reasoning for this person is that, well, I'm going to stake my claim on this medicine called Daraprim. And that's exactly what he did. So once he got his name on that medication, nobody else wanted to touch it. So it allowed him to raise that price of that medicine to $750 a pill. Now, interestingly...
Wait a minute. So you're saying that the patent had expired. He didn't need the patent any longer, just that the other pharmaceutical companies decided they would not produce it?
That is correct.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, there is that agreement that they have. In any case, interestingly, of course, that this medicine, Daraprim, is basically, it costs about 16 cents a piece outside of the United States. So that's another story.
Right.
In other words, there are medications out there that they can mine and find out, well, what medications is exclusive to certain diseases that can be life-saving, and yet they are the only gaming medications in town. So there are things like that, and they're using that. Now, you might think that, well, gee, that guy, he's got to be so greedy that he can charge a pill that costs him $13.50 to $750. Well, actually, as we speak here, there are a lot of that medications that have exactly the same rate of
return on them. Yeah.
High rise in fee. And we talked about, well, gee, this is about 5,000% increase in rate. Well, there are medications out there that we're using now that the companies have raised the price to more than 10,000%. You know, a very good example would be medications like digoxin. Now, you talked about old medication.
Right.
Digoxin goes back all the way to, what, Hippocrates? Or,
almost.
Right, Foxglove. And people will say, well, what about that medicine? Well, we have been using that, and at one time it probably cost no more than 1 cent a pill. And one day somebody decided that, well, gee, they're going to raise that to $1.50. Nobody bat an eye because, well, it's only $1.50 a tablet. Well, if you count from less than 1 cent a pill to $1.50, that's a lot of jump.
Right.
But it is happening every day.
Yeah.
So what I'm telling you is that this guy was just so greedy that he's all over the place. But there are things like this that's going on. So why are all these medications prices going up? Well, again, like you said, it's greed. 2, it's exclusivity. 3, the United States is still the best place to make money from pharmaceuticals because we happen to write so much prescriptions for anything that moves. So this is literally a gold mine for big pharmaceutical industries. Nothing like this exists outside of the United States.
Another reason that it doesn't exist outside the United States is there are a lot of countries where you don't need prescriptions for a number of these medications. We've put a lot of the decongestants that you cannot get without the pharmacist. There are a number of them. I can't remember what we had to get. A lot of the simple antibiotics.
That's
simple
right.
antibiotic. You can go down, you can be in Mexico, all of a sudden develop diarrhea, go into the closest pharmacy without a prescription and get an antibiotic to take care of it.
That's true.
So, I mean, people do kind of know when to take an antibiotic. And here in this country, they keep saying you have to be responsible for your own health, you know, but heaven forbid you allow the pharmaceutical company to lower the cost of medication, which is going to bring in a couple of other issues that are very current to the pharmaceutical industry today. But
well, so let's go back to the cost of medication, because the average cost of medications had doubled for the last 10 years. And we're talking about, again, the ordinary medications like blood pressure medicines, like diabetes medicines. And these are not the new medications we're talking about. These are the average medications, including generics that we're talking about.
Right.
So compared to what it was 7 years ago, the cost of present medications have doubled already. Now, so the question is, well, why is that happening? Well, pharmaceutical companies, of course, want to make some profit, and these are the mainstay, these are the bread and butter medications, and so they basically want just to keep up with inflation, and inflation, of course, is created by them. So in any case, compared to what is outside, and these are the same medications that these companies make outside of the United States, the cost of medications in the United States would be quite high, even quadruple. So places in Europe, places in the Southeast Asia, especially India, you don't see this kind of cost of medications.
Do you think that that is one reason why these other countries, unlike the U.S., there's a number of reasons why in the U.S. there have not been protests against the TPP. There have been, but they're minor. You don't see them on the news. You also don't see the number of protests that have been going on in Europe and in Asia over both the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the TTIP, the one that goes to the European Union.
Well, most of the European markets are socialized type of medicine, and therefore there is a restriction on how much pharmaceuticals can charge medication.
Except if they do sign that trade agreement, that will be null and void because of their investments.
That will be a separate discussion, I think. But right now,
that's why the pharmaceutical companies love this.
Oh yeah, that's why
they can't raise the cost of medication any higher, Ben, in the United States.
Well,
they're looking at a whole new world market.
Well, there are a lot of other ways that they can raise the prices, but
not in the United States.
In terms of the European market, it's limited in how much they can charge, for the simple reason that it is regulated by the government, for the simple reason that the government are the buyers of those medications.
Yes, and the government is signing the contracts that these corporations and pharmaceutical companies in particular on this particular item.
There are actually countries in Europe that prohibits pharmaceutical companies from making a profit. And so there are pharmaceutical companies in Europe that actually have their manufacturing plant in the United States. Why? Because they want to market their prescription medications to the Americans, because that's where they can get the most
right, but that is not going to be lasting in Europe, because these trade agreements that are signed by governments, they're not signed by it is signed by the government. They will be prohibited from having that. That's what is in these trade agreements. As unbelievable as that sounds, that is what is in there.
Oh yeah, and that will change obviously once they implement the trade agreement. So now let's move on to another group of medications, and this would be the brand name medications, because now what we were talking before is this so-called generics or ordinary medications. So now we have the brand name medications, meaning that these are medications that had not run out its patent yet, and so they still have the brand that is protected for that company that makes them. And these medications basically are the ones that will give you the sticker shock. And so you'll have this new diabetes medicine. A very good example would be Victoza. And people will say, wow, this is really great new medications for diabetes. And the doctor will say, yeah, that's really true. It's not only that, but it will make you lose weight. Oh, I want that because I really want to lose weight as well. So give you the prescription for Victoza or something like that, and you go to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist will tell you, well, your copay is going to be half of the cost of this medicine. And you say, well, that's not bad. So how much is the half? Well, it will be $200. What do you mean? Well, the full price would have been $400 for a 30-day supply, but because you're only going to pay half, that's your copay, that's only $200. So you figure out, well, how come it is that expensive? Well, it's because these medications ordinarily have a price range of between $500 to $600. Now, another example would be brand name for eye drops, and eye drops are one of the most expensive medications there are in the market. You talk about this little tiny bottle that has maybe about, what, 10 drops in there? And that they'll charge you something like $300.
What is the name of that one?
Or something to wet your eyes, Restasis.
Restasis, that's
and
it.
that will
That's
cost
the one
you
that was
something
just
$200 to $300 for a month supply. So these are medications that are still held by pharmaceutical companies, and they are maybe making money out of it or not, depending on how popular that medications are. So, but that is what they're trying to market, and that is what their product in the pipeline. Now, the third group of medications that really is going to be the future, by the way, and that's going to really fight specific disease are what we call as biologicals. And these are man-made medications. These are basically medications that will act like a silver bullet and target the cellular structure of a disease. And the first medicine that came out for this is against rheumatoid arthritis. And these medications will target the so-called bad cells that will create the rheumatoid arthritis. And so you can see that
it targets specific bone cells?
It targets a specific cell. So we call that, these are monoclonal antibodies. So these are silver bullets that will target that particular cell. And the concept, of course, is that most disorders, illnesses, are caused by, on a cellular basis, caused by some abnormal cells that behave abnormally. And so they want to target those cells. And the same thing as with the cancer cells. Cancer cells are probably bad cells that get developed and just kind of slipped and able to propagate. And so normally our own body would have made that surveillance and kill those cancer cells before they can get out of the circulation. But unfortunately, they are able to, and they grow. And so what we try to do is to aim and target them by using the so-called biologicals. Now, what are biologicals? Well, these again are the same kind of research, DNA research, that had been done with the bacteria. So what you do is you basically have the gene sequence of the kind of cells that these bad cells are made up of. And
so do you take the cells from a person who has rheumatoid arthritis first? Do you take some of those rheumatoid arthritic cells?
No, they're no longer that crude, Bunny. They can make, from a computerized model, they can make the cellular structure of that rheumatoid cells, and they will just insert a certain chemical or biological, we call it biological, and that becomes an antibody, which has nothing, no other job than to attach itself.
Okay, I want to understand this, and I want to feel comfortable with it. But what you're beginning to say is very similar to the way genetically modified plants are developed. You take a cell and you put in a non-species kind of other DNA into that, and then you have corn that is resistant to Roundup. Because you have Roundup in the corn itself, so it's resistant to the other Roundup around it. Now, I'm not comfortable with that. So what you're saying to me is that you've got a bacteria, and we've got lots of bacterias in our body, so I don't have to be too concerned about that. They're a good bacteria and they're a bad bacteria, so that I can deal with. But when you're telling me you're putting these other biological things that are constructed out of a computer, I know that you can't print that out, okay, and then take that piece of paper that you've printed that out on, even if it's a 3D model, and insert that into bacteria. So what is inserted into the bacteria?
is the property of the say the cell that produced rheumatoid arthritis. And what you did is you tried to make, once you made that, you then either inject it to a living animal like a sheep so that they can produce antibody and use the antibody to fight the type of cells that you want to fight against, or you can just go ahead and make it, develop your own antibody. So there are a lot of things, but these are what we call as biological. And yes, that is true. Basically, we are interfering with DNA structure, and that's why some people call it recombinant DNA. So you can manipulate the DNA of all the cells in the body, and in a way that it will behave either the same as what that normally would do, or it will behave differently, meaning that it will attack those abnormal cells. But in any case, those are what we call as biological, and that is the future, by the way, of medicine. Now, you can imagine that some of these medications take years to develop, but once you develop the technique, it really is not as difficult.
All right, let's
as a
go back to
startup.
the other question then. Where are they being developed?
Laboratory.
What laboratories? I mean, are they being developed in the laboratories at the National Institute of Health? Are they being developed in the laboratories over at Harvard?
They're all
are
over. They're all over in every laboratory, yes.
At Pfizer's?
They have that at Pfizer's, yes.
How basic is the research at Pfizer's for this?
I'm not really sure because I haven't been to that place. But
would
you imagine that
you think that they're not, I'm sure, starting at base one. I'm sure that because the initial research for all of this did not begin at Pfizer's.
I'm sure that the research community is, there's no secret in those kind of research community. I mean, the ideas are shared, knowledge are shared. It's just a question of who put the patent in there that prevents you from marketing your product. But you can make the same product and you can make the same research.
Well, you did a lot of research at Yale.
And we did, but nobody ever think of doing any patent on things, because once you did your research, you will publish it, and then you publish it and you don't even know what it means, what is the significance of what you're doing.
Well, yes, you do. Well, I mean, you saw the significance in the medications that
in any case,
that followed your research.
And there are people who think of nothing but what they can market, and so they will use those knowledge and design their own research based on the basic research that have already been known. So they will then go on to develop newer and newer medications, which brings us to the best product that they have made so far. And this is just the beginning. Like you said, this is just the first ray of light that came to our research, and that is now they came up with this medicine called Harvoni. And this medicine is specifically made to kill the hepatitis C virus, and never had anything like this been made before, but they were able to do this. So when you take this pill every day for say 12 to 24 weeks, it will literally seek the hepatitis C virus and kill it completely. And it is such an amazing thing, because you get a patient with hepatitis C and you draw the blood and you do a viral count, and you have something like 10 million copies of this virus per drop of blood, say, for instance. And they have had it for years, and then you start giving them these medications. 10 weeks later, 12 weeks later, you do another viral count, and there's nothing, no longer detected. It's such an amazing product that you would say.
They find no side effects, no contradictions or reasons why someone should not have this.
Well, I'm sure that they will probably come up with a list of side effects pretty soon. But yes, there are a few of them, of course. But these are much, much better than the old way of treating hepatitis C, because the old way of treating hepatitis C is giving them injections.
Okay, now the
of
bottom line
interferon.
shock that you want to...
Well, the bottom line is that, of course, it will cost the insurance company or whoever
I have no insurance, so how much is this going to cost?
$80,000 a year.
80,000.
Yeah, that
8
is this.
0.
Yeah, that is the short end of it. It can be up to 120,000. All right. So, now, how many person in the United States have hepatitis C? Approximately 3 million people in the United States have hepatitis C. Well, how many veterans in the VA have hepatitis C? Well, several. There are quite several.
We don't have numbers
We don't
on
have
that.
numbers. So you multiply that with $80,000 per patient, to treat. That will come up to be a substantial amount of money, a big sum. So basically the question now is, well, why is that? And the question is, how do we as a society allow that to happen? Well, it's a free market, basically. That's why when they came up with this medication, the doctors in India said that, well, we want these medications because we got more hepatitis C in our country than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, I remember this.
Now, India is different, though, unfortunately. India does not recognize copyright or patent to medications. As far as India is concerned, if you market your medicine in India, then India has the ability to manufacture it themselves.
I don't know what that number comes out to, but 80,000 by 3 million is what? 2.4?
I don't know what
That
that
can't be
number is.
trillion.
I don't know what number that is, but
But
anyways.
it has to be at least 2.4 trillion.
So India came up with this idea a long time ago that if any pharmaceutical companies market their product in India, then the Indian government has the right to reverse engineer that medicine so that they can produce it inexpensively in India to be marketed for the Indian people. And that's exactly what they did with this medicine, Harvoni. And they said that, well, if you want to market this medicine in our country, then we want to be able to make it ourselves. And the CEO of this big company said, well, we really did not produce this medicine
Oh yeah,
for
the poor people.
the poor people, but this was meant to be used only by the
Those who can afford it.
westernized,
People who can afford it. Even people in the Western
right.
world cannot afford it. But wait a minute, why would they even bother to market it in India?
Because India has the highest
Yes, but
number
if they're going to make their own, why would they even bother to market it there? If India, did they win that suit?
India was able to come up with, I think there was a compromise, but India makes this
Medication.
medicine themselves for their own people.
Only for India?
Yeah, that's the deal. So now the question really is, well, where does profiteering begins, or where ends, and saving lives begins, and this kind of issue? So ethical question. Now, this is just one of the medicine that just came out. Now there are other medications. There is a condition called primary pulmonary hypertension, and it's a very devastating disease,
Right.
Uncurable. And unfortunately, there's not that many people who have this type of disease. They also came up with exactly similar medication that is only for this. Except this time it would cost close to $500,000 a year to maintain these patients.
So it doesn't cure it.
It doesn't cure it. It maintains them. It makes them comfortable. Now, Canada basically buys their prescription medicine from the United States, because most of the companies come from the United States and sell them to Canada. Now, Canada has a population of something like, I don't know, in one town, something like 58 of these people that have this disease.
All in one town?
Well, I think it's in
One
one
area?
province, right? And so they wanted to obviously buy these medicines, but they cannot afford it because it would use up all the money that they have for their medical system in that province. And so they have to sue this company. And the company, of course, will not settle, because if they allow Canada to win, then they can be dictated to lower down the price of their medicine. Instead of costing $500,000 per year, then it will only be, say, $100,000. So they did not want to lose, because they want to continue charging this $500,000 medication. And there are a lot of these, by the way, going on right now. And that's what I said, that all of a sudden somebody opened up the door to the gold mine, and lo and behold, there are just so many sparkles that they can see as far as the eyes can see, because we are now opening a new form of medicine, and they're called biologicals, and that they can be life-saving, and they work.
Now, there are two things I want to just add to what you've just said. One, certainly, again, goes back to the TPP and the fact that these pharmaceutical companies are looking, they're very happy with that, because it's for a number of reasons. One, their patents, even if they're beginning to expire in the United States, the patents are then extended to all of these new countries that they're now going to be going into market into. The second is that there is a bill that passed the House last year, 2015. I can't remember whether it was in July or October of 2015. It's called the 21st Century Cure Bill.
Okay, what is that?
Sounds good, doesn't
Yeah.
it? It's a cure bill. This is great. The bill was written by pharmaceutical companies.
Well,
Surprise.
of course,
surprise.
all our bills are written by industries now.
Right.
I don't see any congressman burning the night oil trying to write
legislation that's
they don't,
benefiting
that
the
doesn't
people.
happen anymore.
No,
Basically,
it should, but that's the way legislation is supposed to be written.
Yeah.
They barely read the legislation.
I'm sure that they only get a big folder plus a check in the front and say,
Yeah, with the check in the front. But what the bill overwhelmingly passed the House. Our congressman voted for it. He said that he voted for it because the Lyme disease, which affects about 1,700 people in Connecticut, that one section was inserted into the bill. Now, that sounds good. However, this was not basically a research bill, and the research, again, we're paying for. This bill comes with a fairly hefty price tag, so we're giving a lot of money to the National Institute of Health, specifically for this bill, and yet the only ones that are going to, again, make obscene profits on medications that we have already paid for through our tax dollars, to me the whole thing is obscene. But most of this bill does concern the marketing of medication, how it can be marketed, and removes a lot of restrictions, which is why I'm sure they wanted this new FDA head, that physician that is in bed with like 30 of the big pharmaceutical companies who just got approved. that's why they wanted someone like him to head up the FDA, because what this bill basically does, it removes all of the safeguards that the United States has always had, that allows medications to go through a testing period, so we all know exactly what the side effects are, what the efficiency of any medication is, even though very often everybody is lying and they pass it anyway, and we find out years later that efficiency really wasn't there.
So they want to fast track every new drugs, basically.
Exactly, and yeah, without any real approvals,
exactly,
they're going to fast track all of our new medications.
Yeah, and so it sounds to me like this is written by a drug company.
It was. It was. And the fact that it has not passed the Senate yet, however, it has gone before the Senate, and the Senate is saying, well, let's break this up. There are too many parts to it. So we've got a lot of senators that are actually looking at specific parts of this act.
Now, that is really a good point, Manny, but the other thing that I really thought that would have been interesting would be, this should have been a #1 issue in the debates for this presidential election day. But nobody is talking about the affordability of medications being marketed in this country.
Well, Bernie Sanders has been. I mean, if you, I know you haven't listened to everything he said, but he has talked about the fact that he took residents of Vermont. He took a whole busload of people from Vermont, brought them across the border into Canada, and women that had cancer, women that, I mean, the whole busload needed all different kinds of medications. And then all of them were able to purchase it there. They came back, and he makes a big point of the fact that, why is it? He has tried in the Senate, he tried in the House to figure out, even when he had the hearing and had the heads of the pharmaceutical companies there saying, why shouldn't we be allowed to re-import these medications that come from the United States? They're safe medications, and you're telling us we cannot import them back here? You're not going to sell it to us for that? Then why can't we re-import them? Bernie Sanders has been trying for this.
But again, that is
You're not dramatic. Hearing it.
No, that is a dramatic, you know, it just point to your attention that this is something, but there is no solution. And that the debate should be, what are you, as a candidate for President of the United States, going to do to cut down on this exorbitant profit margin?
He's already said what he would do. He has clearly stated it. He has clearly stated that, first of all, you have to have single-payer health care. Second of all, that Medicare for all should be negotiating the same way the VA does for its medication. What does a veteran have to pay for digoxin?
Well, we've charged a flat fee for every medication. So that's why.
But I mean, you know what I'm saying.
If you want to get, for those that have to pay copay, a 30-day supply of aspirin or baby aspirin would be $9. A 30-day supply of this medicine Harvoni, which would have been $30,000 or more, would
still
be
$9. Right, and that's what Bernie Sanders is talking about. First of all, $30,000 is a lot less than $80,000, right?
Well,
which is what they're going to be charged if it's outside the VA system. So what he's saying is that yes, this is the type of system. Everybody should be able to not have to die from a disease because if they are being forced to die from a disease, it's for the benefit of somebody who's going to be making $1 billion a year. That is wrong.
Well, that is the reason why I really think that this should have been part, or maybe it will be, because obviously the general campaign has not started yet, and basically what we're really doing is popularity contest, primarily for, you know, the primaries and the caucuses and so on.
Well, no, to me, it's been much more than that. And the fact that none of the general mainstream media carries these kinds of issues. What they want to do is talk about Hillary's emails. Oh, yes, well, and there's, you know, I mean, what they should be there's lots of stuff they could talk about with Hillary, but the fact that what they'd rather do is just make it, rather than point out that, oh my God, look at the crowds that are appearing before Bernie Sanders, to really look at every single policy that he has come out with, to instead try to take little snippets of, you're trying to insult, are you insulting my integrity from Hillary, or the one-liners that, I mean, that is what's wrong. Because exactly what you're talking about, Bernie has come out with. He has made those policy statements. He has tried to get the mainstream media to at least report on some of this. It's not ever there. It's the same with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You're not hearing about that. You're not hearing about what Glass-Steagall would really do, or they're not tearing apart Hillary Clinton's, oh, well, I'll tell the boys to knock it off in Wall Street, or she has a better plan for reigning in Wall Street. Baloney. She doesn't have any plan for reigning in Wall Street.
Well, she won't plan on doing that. Obviously, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. So, in any case, this is my talked about the cost of medication. So it's going to get higher if we are maintaining, if we're going to maintain our health care. I'm not sure what they call it, system, or healthcare monopoly, oligarchy by pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, or whatever healthcare we are talking about, is going to get worse in terms of cost of medication. Even if you have insurance, says you are not free because the cost of your copay is going to give you not just a sticker shock but a heart attack. Because when you see these medications, it really can be very expensive.
It's our whole healthcare system right now. It's not just the medications. Everything is turning into a corporate conglomerate. We don't have a community hospital in Norwich anymore.
Or anywhere.
Or, well, and down in New London now, they're going to be being taken over by Yale. So that community hospital will go. The one in Willimantic is already gone. I mean, we are losing real community hospitals. Physicians are losing the ability to even be in touch with their patients anymore. You know, you go to the hospital, you have a hospitalist. I've heard horror stories. The lady we met in New York this weekend, she described, she's from Minnesota, and she described her experience with her dad going into a hospital where the doctor was changed every 3 days because the hospitalist changed. The fact that after he went in with pneumonia, developed a MRSA infection in the lung, then developed an E. coli infection in the lung, which to me is almost impossible to get. You get E. coli from the other end of your body. You know, it doesn't go through the lung. I mean, it was a nightmare in listening to her, but it's repeated every single day in every single community. And the fact is, if we do not elect someone that has the best interests of the American people and still wants to continue to make sure that the benefits of legislation that's passed in Washington goes to these large corporations, we are in for a very, very rough time.
This is probably a good question to ask your legislator, and they say, "Oh, I sponsored a bill," or when they say, "Oh, I wrote a bill," or "I passed a bill." I think the first thing that we should ask each and every one of them is, did you write that bill?
Did you write it? Who did you have help you with it? Who advised you on writing this? You know, I mean, because none of it is ever written in English. But then the majority of our legislators are attorneys. So, you know, I don't know, maybe they just all use legalese, but even when I read most of the bills, the only ones I can really understand, HR 676 was real easy to understand. And if you haven't ever read HR 676, it's been something that Ben and I have talked about for over 10 years now.
Something like that.
Yeah, over 10 years. It is the Medicare for All single-payer health care bill that I think unless Bernie Sanders is elected, we will never see a change in our health care. But we are running out of time already.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh.
There are a couple things I just wanted to,
Okay, go ahead.
to hit before,
So,
because we've been missing part of our control room crew for about, do you want to come out, Mike? I don't know if you even want to come out. I'd love to have you come on out. Come on out so we can say hi.
that's all right.
I think he's
They're
going to be shy. They really love the control room. But Mike is back. He has finished his class. He's had his permit for driving for a while. Now he has the class, so I guess he has to wait another 6 weeks or so before he
Yeah.
gets his...
It's not like the good old days, huh,
Well, we
Bonnie?
could just go and get our license.
And then that evening go and
My dad could
drive.
take me, you know, teach me how to
Drive your-
drive and, you know, beat my bottom blue if I disobeyed at one traffic sign. But no, it is very different. They go through a very rigorous process now. You just got in the car. You didn't even have your dad showing you. You just got in the car and rode in the fields, right?
Yep.
See? Okay. We'll be back next week with another episode of Norwich Confidential. So feel free to check us out on Facebook, Norwich Confidential.
And if you have any questions, again, just send us an email or whatever. We'll try to answer it. We were not able to give you such details on
Right.
this topic tonight. It's a long topic. There's plenty of things to say about it.
So we'll be back next week. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.